When the first groups of German prisoners of war stepped through the gates of Camp Butner, Camp Aliceville, and Camp Algona in 1943, many of them carried with them the same assumptions they had grown up with inside the Third Reich, that industrial labor was a male domain, that heavy machinery and factory work were tasks reserved exclusively for men, and that women were naturally unsuited for anything beyond farm chores, clerical work, or household duties. Nazi propaganda had repeated these ideas for years, through school books, radio broadcasts, and the speeches of Goebbels and Hitler, insisting that the strength of Germany relied on women remaining at home, producing children for the fatherland rather than entering machine shops or transportation corps. So when these POWs began their work detachments inside the United States, they expected to see a familiar world of men in overalls, men behind truck wheels, men repairing engines. Nothing, absolutely nothing prepared them for what they were about to witness: American women running the very machinery that powered the war they were fighting. The shock began early. Many POWs were transported from the camps to work sites in military trucks, and as they rolled through the gates, the first thing they often noticed was that the person driving the truck was a woman in uniform, wearing trousers, boots, and a cap, confidently handling a 2.5-ton GMC CCKW as if it were the most natural thing in the world. To the POWs, this sight alone felt like a violation of every ideological certainty they carried. In Nazi Germany, women were forbidden from driving heavy transport vehicles. The Reich Labor Ministry specifically blocked women from operating trucks, tractors, and industrial engines. Yet here in America, young women barely in their 20s navigated military convoys, reversed massive trucks into loading bays, and spoke to MPs with the same authority as any soldier. But the greater shock came when POWs reached the factories themselves. According to official War Department reports and POW interrogation transcripts, the moment of disbelief was almost universal. Inside American plants, steelworks, aircraft assembly halls, ammunition warehouses, and repair depots, women were everywhere. They were welding, riveting, machining, supervising, testing engines, and maintaining equipment. Some POWs assumed at first that this must be some kind of temporary show, a special event staged for propaganda. They could not grasp that this was normal daily life. Inside workshops where POWs unloaded crates or cleaned floors, women operated drill presses, stamping machines, hydraulic cutters, and torque wrenches. In one repair depot outside Des Moines, German soldiers watched a woman half their size hoist a gearbox using a chain lift, align it with a truck axle, and tighten the bolts with a pneumatic wrench, all while instructing two inexperienced male workers on the correct torque measurement. At the locomotive maintenance yard near Fort Dodge, POWs saw women in denim overalls climbing onto steam engines, scraping boiler plates, lubricating valves, and checking gauges. It was not a display, it was routine. What made the scene even astonishing was the competence. In their testimonies, many German POWs admitted that they had assumed American women would be clumsy or weak. Instead, they were horrified to discover that these women were efficient, disciplined, and fast, sometimes faster than men. The iconic Rosie the Riveter poster, which POWs occasionally saw pinned in warehouses, was not exaggeration. By 1943, more than 6 million American women had entered the workforce to support the war effort. They built half of America's tanks, ships, trucks, and aircraft. At Willow Run, where Ford produced the B-24 Liberator, more than a third of the workforce were women, many trained from scratch, capable of reading technical diagrams, adjusting drill angles, and measuring rivet spacing with expert precision. For POWs whose worldview had been shaped by laws like Rückkehr ins Haus, return to the home, which forced German women back into domestic roles, this felt like an alternate universe. Nazi Germany had failed to mobilize half of its population, leaving critical factories short of workers. Women were forbidden from welding steel or working assembly lines because Hitler believed such labor was unfeminine and would weaken the nation. Meanwhile, America fully embraced women's labor, turning its factories into the largest industrial engine in human history. Many POWs described this astonishment in their post-war memoirs. One wrote, "We believed no war could be won with women in the factories, but America proved us wrong every day." Another recounted his first visit to a steel shop where a team of women welders in leather aprons worked inches from molten metal. "We stared as if watching a miracle. These women did what in Germany only the strongest men attempted." The amazement was not limited to heavy industry. On farms across the Midwest, POWs saw women operating tractors, repairing plows, and driving grain trucks. In supply depots, women logged inventory, issued tools, and performed mechanical inspections. In rail yards, women worked as switch operators and freight coordinators. In motor pools, the Women's Army Corps ran entire workshops, servicing jeeps, ambulances, and transport vehicles. To the POWs, it was as if American society had simply decided that war demanded full participation from everyone and acted on that decision without hesitation. They saw a country where necessity overrode ideology, where competence mattered more than gender, and where women were trusted with responsibilities the German state refused to assign them. What struck the POWs most was the atmosphere. There was no shame, no embarrassment, no hesitation. Women joked with the men, wiped grease from their hands, and returned to work. Supervisors, male and female, treated women as equals on the factory floor. The POWs realized that in America, the war effort was not only a military operation, but a civilian revolution. And as they watched women performing tasks that Hitler's government had declared impossible or unnatural, many German POWs experienced something they had never expected: doubt. Doubt about Nazi ideology, doubt about their leaders, doubt about the supposed superiority of the German system. Standing in the roar of American machinery, surrounded by women who drove trucks, fixed engines, and built war machines, they saw, perhaps for the first time, that the world they had come from was smaller, weaker, and more fragile than the one they were now inside. For most German prisoners, the shock they felt in their first days around American women workers did not fade, it deepened. What began as simple surprise turned into a profound ideological crisis, because these POWs were not just observing a different labor system, they were witnessing the dismantling of everything Nazi Germany had taught them about gender, society, and national strength. To their astonishment, the United States had mobilized women on a scale Hitler had categorically rejected. And even more disturbing for them, it had done so successfully. The roots of their disbelief lay in the rigid structure of the Third Reich. Nazi ideology, reinforced through organizations like the Bund Deutscher Mädel, League of German Girls, and propaganda speeches by Goebbels, declared that a woman's destiny was limited to the 3 Ks: Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. Women could serve the state by producing sons, maintaining households, and supporting men. Industrial labor, particularly heavy mechanical or technical work, was portrayed as physically damaging, morally inappropriate, and socially degrading for women. Even as Germany entered a total war, Hitler refused to reverse this stance. He famously declared in 1943, "I will not force German women into factories. Their place is with their families." This decision had disastrous consequences for German industry. By 1942, the Reich was chronically short of labor. Aircraft assembly plants lacked skilled hands, railroads were understaffed, munition factories were stretched thin, yet the Nazi leadership continued to forbid women from taking on the full range of industrial positions. The German war machine kept running only by exploiting forced laborers, millions of foreign workers dragged from occupied territories. But even then, output lagged behind demand. German POWs arriving in America understood none of this. They had been told German women were too refined or too delicate for industrial work, and they accepted these claims without question. So when they saw American women welding steel, operating cranes, assembling aircraft engines, or driving large trucks, it shattered the ideological facade they had lived under. They weren't just seeing women perform skilled labor, they were seeing women excel at it. And this forced them to confront a reality the Nazi regime had hidden from them. Competence was not determined by gender, and strength did not come from rigid social roles, but from utilizing the full capability of a society. In the factories where POWs worked, this revelation struck them repeatedly. A machinist at a Des Moines depot remembered POWs standing in stunned silence as a woman demonstrated how to use a precision lathe. They stared as she measured tolerances to the thousandth of an inch, adjusted tooling, and produced a flawless part after a single try. When a POW later attempted the same task and struggled, the woman calmly corrected him, explaining the technique with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing.
This moment humiliated and fascinated him at the same time. Reports from Camp Algona describe similar scenes. POWs assisting at a farm equipment repair shop saw a woman mechanic crawl beneath a tractor, remove a cracked drive shaft, fit a new one, and test the engine, all without assistance. In Germany, one POW later wrote, no woman would have been allowed to touch such a machine. But in America, she didn't just touch it, she owned the job. The ideological conflict grew sharper whenever POWs compared American women to what they had been told about their own country. The Reich's radio propaganda had insisted that women working in factories would lead to the breakdown of society. Yet here they were in America, forming an essential part of the war economy, respected by their colleagues and regarded as indispensable. Instead of decline or disorder, the POWs saw efficiency, abundance, and morale. American women were confident, assertive, and unashamed of their roles. They took pride in their work, and the results were undeniable. As they continued their assignments, POWs began to notice an even deeper layer of the ideological contradiction. American men respected these women as co-workers, not just as wives or mothers. Foremen praised them openly, engineers trained them, military officers relied on their logistical skills. In Nazi Germany, the idea of a man taking instruction from a woman, much less trusting her with critical tasks, was almost unthinkable. But in America, it was simply everyday life. The contrast extended beyond factories. POWs working on U.S. farms saw the Women's Land Army harvesting crops, operating tractors, repairing plows, and managing agricultural cooperatives. At motor pools, they watched women AC mechanics servicing Jeeps and ambulances, replacing spark plugs, checking ignition timing, and repairing carburetors. At rail sidings, they saw women conductors directing freight cars, switching tracks, and signaling crews. This was not propaganda. It was not staged. It was not exceptional. It was the American war effort functioning exactly as designed. In conversations amongst themselves, POWs struggled to reconcile what they were seeing with the beliefs they had grown up with. Some reacted with denial, insisting these women must be unique cases or special types selected for morale purposes. But as weeks turned to months, the scale of women's participation made denial impossible. Others reacted with resentment or embarrassment, realizing that American society had deployed its entire population with a flexibility and pragmatism Germany lacked, and that this difference was one of the reasons they were losing the war. The most thoughtful POWs understood an even deeper implication. American democracy empowered citizens to act in ways a dictatorship could not. Women volunteered, learned new skills, moved across the country and worked long hours, not out of coercion, but commitment. They felt ownership of the war effort. Their participation was a choice, not a command. For German POWs raised in a system that glorified obedience above initiative, this was perhaps the most disorienting revelation of all. They saw that a society built on personal freedom had mobilized its people more effectively than a society built on authoritarian control. And right at the center of that revelation stood the American woman, in work boots, gloves, goggles, and welding gear, proving that everything the Nazis had said about weakness and strength was wrong.
If the shock German POWs felt at seeing women driving trucks and repairing engines challenged their ideology, then what they witnessed inside America's wartime factories utterly upended their understanding of industrial power. For the men who had grown up hearing Hitler's boasts about German engineering and industrial superiority, the inside of an American factory was like stepping into another world, one louder, brighter, faster, and far more modern than anything most of them had ever seen. And in the middle of this industrial roar, it was women, not men, who kept the assembly lines running. From Detroit to Seattle, from the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the aircraft plants of California,
German POWs assigned to auxiliary labor tasks found themselves surrounded by thousands of American women who worked with a confidence and technical proficiency that shocked them. War Department records confirm that many POWs were assigned to agricultural or depot work, but even those who never entered a major factory still witnessed its output. Towering stacks of components, endless lines of trucks, engines crated and ready for shipment, and the constant movement of material that flowed from plants powered heavily by female labor. And for POWs transported near major manufacturing centers such as Willow Run, they could see the true scale of what American women had achieved. Willow Run, Ford's massive B-24 Liberator assembly plant, was perhaps the most impressive example. Stretching nearly a mile long, it was the largest factory under a single roof in the world. Before the war, many German soldiers believed American industry was clumsy and inefficient compared to German precision manufacturing. But when POWs saw Willow Run's output, one B-24 bomber rolling off the line every 63 minutes by 1944, they realized that Germany had never produced anything remotely comparable. What stunned them further was the composition of the workforce. More than a third of the workers building these four-engine bombers were women. These women riveted the aircraft's skin, assembled wing spars, inspected control linkages, wired instrument panels, and installed turret mounts. They did not just assist, they built the bomber that would one day fly over Germany. Similar scenes unfolded across the country. At Boeing in Seattle, thousands of women assembled B-17 flying fortresses, climbing inside fuselages, drilling holes with precision, installing oxygen lines, and ensuring structural integrity at every stage. Many German POWs, raised on the myth of the invincible Luftwaffe, could barely understand that the bombers devastating German cities were being built by housewives, teachers, waitresses, and farm girls who had learned their trade in a matter of weeks. In steel plants, women worked in inspection and shaping roles, checking billets, operating grinders, gauging measurements, and handling machines powerful enough to break bones in an instant. At shipyards in Richmond and Norfolk, women welded full-sized Liberty ships and Victory ships, sealing hundreds of feet of hull plates. They crouched beneath steel beams in showers of sparks, working without hesitation in roles that German ideology taught were completely unnatural. What shook POWs most was the atmosphere of professionalism. In Germany, wartime production relied heavily on coerced labor. Forced workers from occupied countries, prisoners, and conscripts who had little training and even less motivation. Factories were often plagued by sabotage, shortages, and uneven workmanship. But in America, the women working the lines were volunteers or paid workers who believed in their contribution. They took pride in their output. They attended training courses, memorized blueprints, and specialized in tasks with an efficiency that rivaled any male workforce. And German POWs repeatedly commented on the precision these women displayed. Wartime interrogation reports include statements such as, "They worked with discipline equal to any man. They learned technical tasks we were told women could never do. Their factories never seemed to stop." The sheer scale of production was overwhelming. American women operated industrial cranes, maneuvering multi-ton components with fingertip control. They set up complex punch presses, changing dies to stamp thousands of identical pieces. They monitor gauges and align jigs, identifying defects with an eye honed by training and repetition. And they did all of this alongside men, not beneath them, not hidden away, but as equals on the floor. For many POWs, the most surprising moment came when they realized how quickly these women had entered the workforce. In Germany, industrial skills were guarded by guild-like traditions and apprenticeships lasting years. But in America, a woman who had never touched a drill press in her life might become proficient within days. Part of this was due to America's highly standardized manufacturing philosophy, machines designed to be operated by anyone with training, parts that were interchangeable, and assembly lines broken into logical segments. But another part was cultural. American women embraced the opportunity. This realization rattled POWs deeply. If America could take millions of civilians, men and women, and transform them into skilled industrial workers at unprecedented speed, what chance did Germany have with its rigid restrictions and ideology-driven policies? They saw firsthand why America's output dwarfed anything the Reich could produce. Perhaps the most telling moment for many POWs came during equipment testing. In one Iowa depot, POWs were assigned to assist with final checks on newly assembled farm or transport machinery. They watched as a woman inspector ran through detailed checklists on carburetor settings, battery loads, brake pressure, and alignment. She caught errors instantly, errors that a German man in their own factory might have overlooked. When a POW later recounted this moment, he said simply, "She knew the machine better than I did." It was here, on the factory floor, amid the noise of drills, welders, and stamping presses, that German POWs realized the full weight of the American wartime industrial miracle. These women were not pretending. They were not placeholders. They were the beating heart of the production engine that supplied the Allied armies with aircraft, tanks, trucks, ships, and weapons in quantities the German state could not even dream of matching. And once POWs saw how seamlessly women integrated into this industrial juggernaut, they understood something that Nazi officials had never admitted. America was winning not because it had more resources, but because it used every citizen, man or woman, to build victory. By the time German POWs had spent several months assigned to American work details, the shock of seeing women driving trucks and welding steel had grown into something far more unsettling. The realization that these same women formed a decisive part of the American war machine. And nowhere did this revelation hit POWs harder than inside the work camps themselves, where daily interactions with American civilians, especially women, forced them to confront just how profoundly the United States had mobilized its society for total war. POW labor in the United States was highly regulated under the Geneva Convention. Prisoners could not be assigned to dangerous military tasks, but they could work in agriculture, warehouses, sawmills, road crews, supply depots, and light manufacturing under supervision. What POWs did not expect was that a significant number of their supervisors, coordinators, or work partners would be women. German soldiers had spent their lives in a culture where women were discouraged, even forbidden from exerting authority over men, particularly uniformed men. So when they stepped into the American workplace and found themselves directed by female foremen, clerks, and technical supervisors, the ideological whiplash was immediate. One of the earliest shocks for many POWs came from administrative control. Work assignments were often issued by civilian offices staffed by women from the Women's Army Corps or by local government clerks. These women handled scheduling, processed paperwork, and gave instructions without hesitation. In Camp Algona's agricultural labor office, several POWs later recalled standing obediently in line as a woman, half their age, read out their names and dictated which farm they were to work on that day. Some prisoners later admitted, quietly in memoirs or interrogations, that this moment alone broke a lifetime of conditioning. In Germany, one POW wrote, "A woman would never command men in uniform. Here, it was natural." Outside the camps, the shock only grew. POWs worked in canneries where women oversaw food processing equipment and trained them in safe operation. They assisted in lumber mills where women measured log dimensions, monitored saw speed, and inspected cuts for defects. At road maintenance sites, women surveyors handled equipment, took slope measurements, and determined how soil should be graded. To the POWs, it was absurd. And yet, undeniably, these women knew exactly what they were doing. In one Colorado work camp, German prisoners clearing brush watched a woman supervisor apply repairs to a faulty ignition coil on a pickup truck, while two male POWs, former Wehrmacht mechanics, watched with embarrassed confusion. She diagnosed a grounding failure, replaced a cable, and had the engine running again within minutes. The prisoners later admitted among themselves that she was more competent than many mechanics in their own regiments. What made this experience even more psychologically disruptive was the consistency of what they saw. It wasn't just one unusually skilled woman, nor a handful of exceptional factories. It was everywhere. POWs cutting wood saw lumberjills from the Women's Timber Corps hauling logs and driving heavy trucks. POWs in warehouses watched women operating forklifts, managing inventory, and moving crates with practiced precision. POWs in supply depots saw women inspecting machine parts, applying quality stamps, and rejecting components that failed tolerance tests. POWs performing clerical tasks for quartermasters saw women balancing ledgers, calculating freight weights, issuing vouchers, and coordinating shipments. And all of it was normal. Over time, POW attitudes began to shift from disbelief to curiosity. Some asked questions, often shyly at first, about how these women had learned these skills. The answers astonished them even further. Many had only weeks of training before taking on jobs that, in Germany, required years of apprenticeship. America's standardized production systems made rapid training possible, but the POWs also saw something ideological at work. American women expected to succeed. Their society encouraged them, their workplaces trained them, their government trusted them. This trust was another shock. In the camps, German prisoners were often supervised by female civilian guards during non-critical tasks, women who treated them firmly but fairly. In Germany, such an arrangement would have been unthinkable, both culturally and legally. But here, a woman with a clipboard and a sidearm could direct 24 German soldiers without fear or hesitation. The POWs noticed this confidence. They also noticed something else. American men respected it. Some German prisoners tried to justify what they saw by claiming that American women were working only out of desperation, that once the war ended they would all return to the home and society would snap back into the proper order. But these arguments became harder to defend when POWs saw entire civilian communities where women were effectively running local infrastructure while men served overseas. Towns kept functioning, transport kept moving, crops were harvested, machinery was repaired. This led to a realization that frightened some POWs more than any weapon on the battlefield. America's society was flexible. It could adapt instantly to crisis. It could mobilize millions overnight. It could put women into roles Germany refused even to consider. This flexibility created a reservoir of national strength that authoritarian rigidity could never match. That realization produced a quiet but profound psychological effect within the camps. POWs had already been struck by the plentiful food, humane treatment, and democratic atmosphere. But seeing the power of America's workforce, powered so heavily by women, destroyed any illusion they held about the inevitability of German victory. They began to see why the Allies produced more planes, more tanks, more ships, and more ammunition than the Axis could ever hope to match. They understood, perhaps for the first time, why Germany was losing the war. Because America's strength did not come from ideology. It came from unlocking the capabilities of all its people, women included. Women especially. And as POWs watched American women organize, build, manage, and operate the machinery of total war, many of them whispered the same observation, a sentence that would appear again and again in their post-war interviews. Germany could never have done this.
By the final year of the war, the experience of German POWs in the United States had evolved from a series of shocks into a deep internal reckoning. What began with disbelief, seeing women behind the wheel of army trucks or operating welding torches, slowly transformed into something far more consequential. An understanding that America's embrace of female labor had reshaped the war itself. For thousands of POWs, this realization would follow them long after the conflict ended, challenging the ideological foundation they had carried into captivity and altering how they viewed both the United States and their own defeated homeland. As the months passed in camps such as Aliceville, Algona, and Camp Swift, German prisoners could no longer dismiss the evidence they encountered daily. Victory gardens were managed by women. Postal operations were run by women. Water treatment plants were staffed by women. Hospitals, supply depots, canneries, textile mills, aircraft repair shops, everywhere POWs looked, American women were working with the assurance of people who believed they belonged exactly where they were. This omnipotence left its mark. In interviews conducted by the U.S. Army's Special Projects Division, POWs repeatedly described this phenomenon as one of the most disorienting aspects of their captivity. Not the food, not the relative freedom, not even the humane treatment, but the sheer normality of women executing essential wartime tasks with skill equal to any man. One Wehrmacht sergeant noted, "In America, there seemed to be no question about whether a woman could do something, she did it, and no one thought it strange." That observation reflected something the POWs had not expected to discover. American society treated competence as more important than gender. In Germany, cultural rigidity kept half the population constrained regardless of talent or desire. In America, a factory hired whoever could rivet quickly, measure accurately, or troubleshoot an engine. A supervisor didn't care whether the hands holding the wrench belonged to a man or a woman, only that the wrench turned the bolt properly. This utilitarian approach shocked POWs who had grown up immersed in Hitler's ideological dictates. The cumulative effect of these observations was profound. POWs learned that American women built the B-24 Liberators bombing Germany, packed the ammunition sent to Normandy, drove the trucks feeding Patton's army, and staffed the communications networks coordinating the invasion of Europe. They realized that every American tank they feared, every aircraft that thundered overhead, and every crate of supplies that sustained the Allied armies had passed through the hands of women at some point. Some POWs resisted this understanding until the end. They muttered that women's labor could only be temporary, that society would collapse if women kept working, or that men would reclaim all roles after the war. But others, especially younger prisoners not yet hardened by ideology, admitted admiration and even a sense of embarrassment. Their society had declared women incapable of such tasks, yet here in America, those same tasks were performed flawlessly every day. The most revealing moments came when POWs interacted directly with female workers. A group of prisoners assigned to mend grain sacks at a Kansas facility discovered that the woman supervising them had memorized every thread count, every gauge of stitching, and every step of machine maintenance. When a POW attempted to correct her, she calmly reminded him of the regulations he had forgotten. He later wrote, "She knew more about that machine than any man I ever met." Another POW recounted how a woman quality inspector rejected a part he believed to be acceptable. She explained tolerances he had never heard of, showed him the blueprint, and taught him how to use the measurement tools properly. He realized then that the American war machine ran on discipline, knowledge, and training, not the hierarchical assumptions that dominated Germany. Even POWs who remained loyal to Nazi ideology found themselves unable to ignore the reality around them. They saw that America's industrial might was not the product of brute strength, but of collective intelligence. It made use of every citizen regardless of gender, and in doing so, it generated an output beyond anything the Axis could match. This realization crystallized in the final months of the war as Allied newspapers began publishing production statistics. Through bulletin boards in POW camps, many Germans read the same headline that shocked the world. The United States produced more military equipment than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. When POWs asked how such a thing was possible, the American guards and officers gave the same answer. Everyone worked, men and women. As the war neared its end, POWs prepared for repatriation. They packed their belongings, collected their meager scrip savings, and waited for transport ships that would take them back to a shattered homeland. But they did not leave unchanged. Many carried notebooks filled with English phrases, sketches of machinery, and names of women they had worked alongside. Some left with new skills, having been taught directly by American civilians. Others left with new convictions, having seen firsthand what a society could accomplish when it did not bind half its population with ideology. Post-war interviews and memoirs revealed that German POWs frequently cited America's integration of women into wartime labor as a central reason the Allies won. Not its tanks, planes, or ships, but the fact that the United States mobilized all of its people while Germany mobilized only half. One POW summarized it perfectly. "We believed we were stronger because our men fought, but America was stronger because its women worked." And when these POWs finally stepped off the ships, returning them to Europe, many to cities destroyed by Allied bombing, they understood something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The sight of American women in overalls, goggles, and work gloves was not a curiosity. It was not a cultural oddity. It was not a propaganda showpiece. It was a decisive weapon of war, as critical as any aircraft carrier or tank division.